It's the backlog, and I'm a bit under the gun getting this episode out. Besides work this week, I finished reading a book, watching a series online, doing some stuff for my parents, and streaming 4 frickin' nights. Seriously, I was live for over 12 hours. That does bring us to our first game though, the promised Fire Emblem 3 Hopes. Or at least the demo. And hey, since I can't talk about the full game, I can only give my first impressions, which lends itself more to the rush job here. First off, this game seems to be much more than I predicted. The demo lets you play up to the end of the first 4 chapters of each of the game's 3 paths. At least 3, assuming there aren't any surprises tucked into the full version. Typically, for the main campaign in a Dynasty Warriors title, it takes around 10 hours to clear, so my guess was that one path might take around that long, but just getting to the end of one story's demo took me around 4 hours, which was so much chunkier than I expected. I was honestly worried that when I started up there wouldn't be enough there, even if I did everything for a full stream. Part of it is the story. The typical tale for these licensed titles is pretty simple, involving dimension hopping, a greater evil, and the power of friendship, all of which I can't say are off the table, but this seems to be more of an alternate timeline of the Three Houses game. Since this one has a more solid plot base, the story is taken a bit more seriously. Something similar was done with Age of Calamity, but given that this one's based off of an RPG, there's a lot more dialogue going on. While it might seem a little out of place for an action game, given the source material, I don't mind as much. As for the actual story content, it's largely interesting. A lot of the elements from Three Houses are back, but remixed, and this keeps things fresh and lets the game throw a lot of curveballs at you, as some of the plot points you'd expect are switched up. If I have one complaint, it's that the cast seems slightly dumber than usual. Like, sometimes they seem to be purposefully ignoring the obvious, and others, like they should at least be a little more suspicious and wary about things, though overall the story is keeping me engaged. The other big thing is just how much they stuffed into the game. You have your typical Dynasty Warriors stuff, the hacking, the slashing, the combos, the special attacks, the level ups, the weapons, the boosted state. They also brought back the strategy elements, like forming a party, giving them tasks, and swapping when appropriate, but it seems more robust here. There's a few more options, units zoom around the field, and more surprising than that, rather than being worthless when not being controlled, AI units can actually get stuff done, like taking bases and felling targets. Thinking back to the allied units in Hyrule Warriors, I was completely blown away when I sent my units off and they did what I asked rather than needing me to step in. Beyond that, they brought in other Fire Emblem staples, like support, pair-up, weapon durability to use extra moves, and the weapon triangle. There's even stuff specific to Three Houses, like cooking and teaming up to do chores to boost motivation and closeness between characters. The team behind this seems very committed to making this a perfect blend between the typical Dynasty Warriors fare and what you'd find in Three Houses. It's honestly pretty amazing. There's a few other things worth noting. In the last Fire Emblem Warriors, there were a lot of shared movesets. That's kinda still true in this one, there being different classes with a lot of specific movesets and abilities. There also seem to be a few classes that are unique to specific characters. While I hated the recycling in the last title, I think it might work here. For one, I don't know how many different classes there are, so this game could top the last in variety. Even if not though, here it feels more like a customization tool rather than a way to cut corners, making it more permissible. And previously, enemies were copy-pasted with no variety between weapons. Fighters and Oni chieftains looked exactly the same, swordmasters and samurai only varying in name. Here though, they've used the different class templates and attached them to different character models to really round out the cast. That lets the game include not only all, or at least most, of the Three Houses characters, but also some minor ones and some that were only alluded to previously. I was constantly surprised by the characters that showed up, a lot of them being ones that I thought they would never bother putting in, and it also spiced up scenarios that could have just very easily have been beat up faceless bandit leader with an axe, or generic enemy general in armor. By the demo's end, I also got a glimpse as to how I assume the rest of the game will be structured. While the first few chapters were the standard dialogue and menus culminating in a battle, the 4th chapter added in some extra bits. You have a hub and activity points for the Three Houses elements I mentioned before, as well as a map you can fiddle with. The chapter has an ultimate goal and accompanying battle, but before you can reach that, there's some additional territory you can scuffle over and claim. Doing so nets you not only rewards, but also access to the end of the chapter's fight. Though whether you need to beat all of them or just enough to get you to the border wasn't clear with the small area they gave. While the first few chapters were more story and exposition than action, I can see this balancing things out a lot better going forward. Overall, I'm really impressed with what I played so far, and I'm looking forward to the full release. Dynasty Warriors games can be kind of hit or miss, some of them being passion projects that the team puts their all into, and others just feeling like lazy cash grabs, and I'm happy to say this seems more like the former. There is just so much here that I'm honestly kind of intimidated. This is going to consume a lot of my time when it does come out, especially since I expect to play through it at least 3 times. I originally planned to stream this, or at least one path, but given all the side activities, menus, strategizing, and dialogue that I'll silently be listening to, I don't think it'd make for good TV. Besides, it'd take me away from my beloved Mega Man for probably several weeks, and I'm really trying to get through both the Classic and X series. Though of course, I will still do a full review of Three Hopes once I get through it. Hopefully I can do so fast enough for it to still be relevant. And now, for the really real backlog part of the episode. I finally got through Shantae, originally for the Game Boy Color, that I picked up as a port for the 3DS, and then rebought and played when it was on sale for the Nintendo Switch, playing a version with enhancements for the Game Boy Advance. Are you following along so far? Anyway, Shantae's a half genie, watching over a place called Scuttletown. One day it gets attacked by a pirate named Risky Boots, who steals from Shantae's Uncle Mimic blueprints for a revolutionary steam engine that she plans to put to nefarious use. Shantae sets out to reclaim the plans and get the items Risky Boot needs to execute them before she does. The game's a Metroidvania, everything being interconnected and you getting different animal transformations and abilities to explore more of the world. This, unfortunately, are where the problems start. Like most early entries in the genre, there is no map. A lot of the world can be explored by going left or right, but there are some side paths, splits, and shortcuts, so exploring willy-nilly can get you lost. This was originally why I dropped the game, because I found a secret passage and ending up who knows where after the first dungeon, leaving me with no clue where I was or what I was to do next. Speaking of the dungeons though, these can also be a trial to get through. With no map, it can be very hard to tell where you still need to explore and lead to a lot of pointless wandering around. Then there are the transformations, like the monkey and elephant. They give you more abilities and exploration options to reach new areas and items, and work pretty well. The issue is how you change. You need to stop and belly dance, inputting a button combination to choose the right form, kinda like the Ocarina in Zelda. You have to do it to a beat though, needing to start over if you miss, and time does not stop when you do so no quick transformations, and if you're not in a good position, you can get sucker punched. Now to be fair, most of the transformations are only 2 inputs long, so memorization often isn't a problem, and there's only a few instances where it feels like you don't have enough time to get them in. But you can also get warp spells by finding baby warp squids and returning them to their mothers. These dances are a bit longer and can be a bit harder to pull off. Either a time pause or a quicker way to pull them off would have gone a long way, though this was corrected in subsequent games. There are also some hardware limitations and questionable design decisions holding the game back. In regards to the former, the Game Boy Color had very limited selection and buttons, leading to just way too much being mapped to just the few that were available. The GBA version did give me access to a third face button, but I was constantly having trouble with stuff like needing to attack before I could run, needing to press things wildly to figure out how to use a sub-item, or trying to scroll the text on an item description in the shop, only to either cancel out or try to purchase it. The game also has a bit of the issue that some Mario titles do, where you're either walking and feeling incredibly sluggish and heavy, or holding down run and feeling like your momentum has more control than you do. Overall, the controls can just be a little off and inconsistent. At one point, I kept dying because I was getting launched into a wall and falling into spikes, when I was supposed to fall left into an opening. Holding left or trying to time it didn't seem to work, until it did, and I couldn't tell you what I did differently. Combat is also awkward, with hitboxes seeming off, you sometimes getting hit when it really doesn't look like you should, and enemies not taking damage when you think you connected. A lot of enemies also take several hits and move around, leading to an odd pattern where you smack them, run away a few steps, then turn around to wail on them again until eventually they die. There are also a lot of problems trying to tell what's part of the background and what's not. The first time I reached the desert, I took damage from a cactus that I thought was just there for aesthetic purposes, and one area, it feels very inconsistent. What's a platform, what's a wall, and what's just there to add to the area's visuals. Then there was my personal demon, a required minigame where you have to beat Roddy Tops in a foot race. You just run a bit faster than her and obstacles get thrown in your path, either stone blocks you have to leap, or trees you have to slide through. You can't make too many mistakes, the hitboxes can be brutal, the screen on the Game Boy wasn't very big so you don't have much time to react, and if you do scuff a run, you have to finish it, you can't just mulligan. This took me longer than it should have to clear, and some people say that it isn't too hard, but I still contend that a wider screen would have made this much simpler. As for the questionable decisions, there's how long most areas and sections are, and all the insta-deaths strewn about. When you die, you get sent back to wherever you ended the area from. Luckily, any enemies you killed, other than the infinitely spawning snakes and zombies, will stay dead, so the way forward will be easier. But there are so many chances to mess up, it's easy to lose a decent bit of progress and forward momentum. This is compounded because you have a life count, and once you get a game over, you don't just start back at your entry point, but at your last save. As long as you select continue, you do keep anything you collected, so it's not a complete waste, but this does make you have to backtrack through areas you've just been through just to get back to where you were. This is especially bad in later areas, where it can feel like there are more spiked surfaces and pits than floor. The game can also be a bit vague with what you're supposed to do. I needed to look up how to damage some of the bosses, and there are some times when the way forward is a bit hazy. Honestly, I accidentally found the entrance to the last area by heading in the direction of where a walkthrough told me to warp to. Had I been left to my own devices though, I would have been going somewhere completely different. There's also a day-night cycle, and like in Simon's Quest, the monsters get stronger when it gets dark, other than those you can take out in one hit, further adding to the sense that you're bashing your head against the wall when fighting them. If combat felt a bit better, it would have been neat though. With everything I've said, you're probably under the impression that I hate this game, and that was certainly true up to a point. I originally got frustrated with the lack of a map and some of the game's shortcomings and just put it down. When I restarted on the Switch, I had no patience starting out, tried rushing through it, and made constant mistakes, leading to more irritation at the game. Late game also had some sections that went on for way too long and were super unforgiving, leading to me getting ticked off a good bit. But you know what? At some point, I did start having fun. While it's a pain to change, the animal transformations are neat and I enjoy using them. Shantae herself has a very unique method of attack. I like the world, the characters, and the humor, so even though they're watered down by comparison to later games, they're still present and it's cool to see where they started from. While the Game Boy Color doesn't age as well as some other consoles, I can still recognize a lot of the designs and tracks that come back later, which is not only amazing how consistent some of them are, but also look and sound pretty good for the time. I also got a lot better with the controls the more I played. Backtracking getting smoother and smoother as I not only obtained more abilities, but also just improved, both of which are things you want just not in games in general, but specifically in this genre. I'd say the biggest flaw with the original Shantae is not being as good as its sequels. Just about everything I love about the series is here, just in much rougher shape, and since you can't have sequels without an original, I am very thankful that this game exists. I went into this playthrough with two big assumptions. The first, that this is the worst Shantae game, still holds true, for all the reasons I already mentioned. The second though, that it's the only bad Shantae game, I wholeheartedly retract. It's actually pretty amazing for the time, and just largely suffers not only from the Game Boy Color's limitation and way forward not having everything pinned down right away, but also being compared to its much better younger siblings. I do think this game is worth playing, especially on a bigger screen, and I can see why it was such a favorite of Nintendo Power back in the day. It does bring up the awkward question of when to play it though. Do you play it after Pirate's Curse or Seven Sirens, the titles most likely to grab you and make you fall in love with the series? Or do you hit this first, before you see that the heights it can reach that makes this seem like such a downgrade by comparison? Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that, but I do recommend all 5 Shantae games. So in case you're keeping track, that takes us to 106 for the backlog and one step closer to my goal of getting down to double digits. I believe. I think I'm going to start trying to clear one short game early in the week, then use the rest of it to chip away at some of the meatier ones, but hey, I have ADHD and can't always stick to things, so we'll see how this pans out. Aside from that, I continue to stream Mega Man titles myself and other games when I have company over on the Victory Tricksters, with highlight clip shows posted here. Maybe consider subscribing if either that or my untimely reviews sound intriguing, but for right now, thanks for watching. Oh, and Mega Man 5 is trash. I will not be taking questions.